The chamber was enormous, far larger than anything on Earth. It stretched higher than the tallest skyscraper, with walls that shimmered in colors no human eye could name. Around the chamber, countless species had gathered, each representing a different corner of the galaxy. Some floated in midair, others had multiple limbs, and a few were creatures that seemed to bend reality itself. The room hummed with quiet tension, a mixture of curiosity, pride, and fear. Every species had come with their own agendas, their own expectations, and a strong sense of superiority. Most of them assumed that humans, the newcomers, were the weakest link. The humans entered calmly, as if they belonged there by right. They moved through the chamber with a measured pace, heads held high, eyes scanning the room, but showing no fear. They did not fumble with gadgets. They did not stumble under the weight of alien stares, and they did not panic at the sight of the incredible beings around them. The humans were few in number, compared to the massive assemblies of other species, yet there was something about their presence that made the aliens uneasy. It was not strength, not weapons, and not even a display of power. It was the confidence in their posture, the clarity in their eyes, and the quiet certainty that they were not going to be intimidated. The chamber fell into murmurs as humans walked past. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Why are they so calm?" asked one insectoid delegate. "They have no fleets to threaten us, no advanced technology yet. What makes them think they can sit here among the great powers?" A tentacled diplomat from a watery world hissed, "I do not like it. They are too composed, too human." Every species had seen humans before in stories or messages, often described as fragile, reckless, and unpredictable. They expected hesitation, fear, or even subservience. But what they did not expect was poise. The human delegation reached the central platform, a raised area where discussions were to take place. The humans did not bow or make ceremonial gestures. They simply stood there, facing the council with an air of polite seriousness. The lead human, a tall figure with a calm expression, looked around the chamber. They did not shout, they did not gesture wildly. They simply observed, taking in every movement, every whisper, and every glance. Their eyes lingered on each delegate long enough to convey acknowledgement, but not enough to show fear or submission. The council members were on edge. The Galactic Council had overseen interstellar negotiations for centuries. They had dealt with species that were powerful, cunning, and dangerous. They had faced diplomats who used threats, charm, and even deception to achieve their goals. Yet humans were different. They did not seem concerned with the power dynamics. They did not grovel, argue, or demand. They simply existed in the room, and that alone caused unease. A representative from the council, a being with crystalline wings that reflected the chamber's shifting lights, stepped forward to open the meeting. Their voice echoed in the vast space, smooth and commanding. "Welcome, representatives of all worlds. Today, we meet to discuss a treaty that will guide the sharing of resources across the galaxy. Every species here has a duty to ensure peace, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Let us begin." The humans did not respond immediately. They waited, observing the room, letting the council feel the weight of their presence. Their silence was deliberate. Other species shifted uncomfortably, unsure if this meant approval, defiance, or something else entirely. Finally, the human spokesperson spoke, their voice steady and clear. "We are here to listen, to understand, and to contribute. But we will not agree to anything that is unjust or unfair. Our goal is cooperation, not submission." The council's crystalline-winged leader paused. There was a flicker of surprise in their expression, a ripple of tension across their features. Most species assumed that humans would bow to authority, even if only superficially. But these humans made it clear they would stand on principles. That was unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and for some, Frightening dot as the council member continued the opening speech. Outlining the proposed regulations and expectations, humans listened attentively. They asked no questions, made no gestures of impatience, and kept their attention fully on the speaker. Yet their expressions were not passive. Their eyes narrowed slightly at parts that seemed questionable, brows furrowed at points that hinted at hidden motives. Other species noticed. Whispers turned into low murmurs. They are not just listening. They are analyzing, judging, seeing through us. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavier. Humans were not loud. They were not aggressive, yet their presence forced every delegate to reconsider their approach. Some species tried to assert dominance subtly, leaning forward in their seats, extending claws, wings, or other appendages in gestures meant to intimidate. But humans remained calm. They did not flinch, they did not fluster, and they did not back down. A diplomat from a gaseous world, hovering slightly above the ground, muttered to a neighboring delegate, "It is unnatural. No species acts like this. They have nothing, yet they command attention." The neighboring alien, a creature with mirrored skin, nodded. "I feel watched, and not in the normal way. It is as if they see us as we truly are, not as we pretend to be." Humans exchanged small, discreet glances among themselves. They communicated silently, a rhythm honed through years of teamwork. Every gesture was measured, every movement intentional. The humans did not react with fear or anger, even as whispers and glances from other delegates tried to unsettle them. They remained steady, a quiet force that drew the room's attention in a way that was impossible to ignore. The first session of the assembly lasted for hours. Council members presented charts, simulations, and treaties, attempting to demonstrate the fairness and logic of their plan. They highlighted the benefits for every species and warned of the consequences of refusal. But humans were not swayed by rhetoric alone. They noted inconsistencies, questioned assumptions, and raised points that others had not considered. A representative from a plant-based species, who had spent centuries cultivating telepathic influence, attempted to sway humans' opinions through subtle mental nudges. The humans noticed, of course. They remained silent, almost polite, but their calm resistance made the plant being uneasy. For the first time, a species used to controlling outcomes realized that humans could not be easily influenced. By the end of the day, the humans had not agreed to anything, nor had they rejected the council's proposal outright. But they had made one thing clear: they would participate on their own terms. They would listen, they would negotiate, but they would never submit blindly. For some species, that was astonishing. For others, it was terrifying. The humans' calm defiance left the council in a state of uncertainty. As the session adjourned, the humans left the chamber for a brief recess. Delegates whispered in every corner, debating and analyzing the humans' behavior. "They are dangerous," one said, "not because they attack, but because they cannot be controlled." Another delegate, a reptilian creature with scales that shimmered in green and gold, nodded. "They do not fear us. That alone is enough to disrupt centuries of balance." The humans, meanwhile, gathered quietly outside the chamber. They did not boast, they did not complain, and they did not celebrate. They simply prepared for the next session, reviewing notes, discussing strategies, and ensuring that every action remained in line with their principles. They were aware of the eyes upon them, the whispers, the judgments. Yet they did not allow any of it to distract them. In the hallways outside, observers from lesser-known species began to take notes. They had seen how humans carried themselves, how they responded to pressure, and how they refused to bow to authority. Stories would travel across the galaxy about today's events, about how humans had entered the chamber calmly, questioned openly, and remained unshaken by a sea of alien eyes. In many ways, the humans had made a mark not by force, not by strategy, but by being fully themselves, unwavering, deliberate, and principled. As night fell on the space station where the assembly was held, the chamber emptied, leaving only echoes of the day's events. Humans returned to their quarters, exhausted yet resolute. They knew that the coming days would be filled with challenges, pressures, and tests of patience. But they also knew one thing with certainty. They had set the tone. They had shown the galaxy that humans would not be underestimated, manipulated, or ignored. And in that simple, deliberate action, they had begun to shift the balance in ways the Council had not anticipated. By the end of the first day, the Galactic Council and its delegates were left with an unsettling realization. Humans were not just another species to be managed or bargained with. They were unpredictable, principled, and most importantly, unwilling to be controlled. That simple truth caused unease, fear, and perhaps even admiration, though none of the council members would admit it openly. And so the stage was set. The humans had arrived, fully aware of the stakes, and the council had begun to realize that this was unlike any negotiation they had ever faced. The galaxy's power structure, built over centuries, was about to be challenged not with weapons, threats, or alliances, but with quiet confidence, calm defiance, and the simple, undeniable will of humanity. The next day, the humans returned to the grand chamber, their steps measured, their expressions calm but alert. The chamber, even in the bright light of the new day, seemed more intimidating than the previous evening. Alien delegates had taken their seats once again, but today the tension was thicker. Whispers traveled like currents through the crowd. Every species had spent the night discussing humans. Some were still in disbelief at their calmness, while others were openly concerned. The humans, however, moved through the room as if the weight of centuries of alien hierarchy held no sway over them. The Galactic Council's leader, the crystalline-winged being, began the session once again, this time with more authority, trying to assert control over the room. "We are gathered to ensure the fair distribution of resources," they said. "Every species here must follow the guidelines that protect balance and prevent conflict. Humans, as newcomers, you are expected to adhere to these standards." The humans listened, their faces composed, their posture firm. One human, the spokesperson, finally spoke after a few moments of silence. "We are listening carefully," they said, "but we want to understand. These guidelines you speak of, are they truly fair to every species? Or are they designed to benefit some over others?" A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. Many species were not accustomed to such blunt honesty. Usually, newcomers would nod, agree, or express gratitude for being allowed to participate. Humans, however, were not willing to accept anything that did not make sense to them. Their questions were simple, direct, and pointed, and they had a way of revealing uncomfortable truths. The crystalline-winged leader's voice grew sharper. "These rules have been created over centuries, with input from all members. They are fair. They are tested. Humans, you will find them reasonable if you are willing to comply." The humans looked around the room. "We have no interest in disobedience," the spokesperson said. "But fairness cannot be measured by tradition alone. We must consider the realities of every species involved. If a rule benefits one at the expense of another, then it is not fair, and we will not accept it." Murmurs erupted across the chamber. Aliens whispered to each other, some with fear, some with anger. One delegate, a large horned creature from a desert world, hissed under their breath, "They dare question the council? They are children compared to our history." Another, a small insect-like creature, replied nervously, "They are not children. They are different. Dangerous, in a way I do not understand." As the discussion continued, the humans began to point out specific flaws in the council's plan. They highlighted areas where rules conflicted, where resources were unevenly distributed, and where the consequences for some species were far harsher than for others. Each observation was delivered politely but firmly. Humans did not raise their voices. They did not gesture angrily. Yet every word seemed to carry weight. One council member, a gaseous being who could shift its shape, tried to counter the humans' points. "You do not understand," it said. "Our system has worked for centuries. We have maintained balance. Your objections are based on a limited perspective." The human spokesperson smiled slightly. "We understand perfectly well. That is why we ask questions. Balance is not something that can be assumed because it has existed for a long time. Fairness must be examined in the present, with honesty for everyone involved." The room grew tense. Several species shifted uncomfortably, exchanging worried glances. No one had ever spoken to the council in such a way. The humans were not angry, not aggressive, but their words carried a weight that others could not ignore. Every species in the room felt the pressure, some secretly admiring the courage of the humans, others quietly panicking. The humans continued, pointing out hidden issues in resource allocation. For example, some planets were being forced to share vital water supplies, while others were allowed to hoard energy reserves. Some species were given control over trade routes that passed through weaker systems, giving them unfair advantage. Every point the humans made was precise, logical, and backed by observation, yet delivered in a tone that was calm and non-threatening. The council began to show signs of straying. The crystalline-winged leader's voice occasionally cracked, and several delegates whispered to one another. "They are too clever," one said. "They are revealing weaknesses we thought hidden." Another muttered, "I do not like the way they do not flinch. It is unsettling." Despite the growing tension, the humans remained composed. They were not there to dominate or humiliate. They were there to seek fairness and understanding. Their calmness only amplified the council's unease. Some aliens attempted to intimidate them with gestures, with displays of energy, and with haughty posturing. The humans simply observed, noting everything with quiet attention. At one point, a representative from a telepathic species attempted to subtly influence the humans' thoughts, trying to nudge them toward agreement. The humans noticed, of course. They did not react outwardly, but their careful, measured movements suggested awareness. That small act unnerved the alien, who had never met a species so resistant to influence. Hours passed. The humans asked questions, highlighted inconsistencies, and offered suggestions for adjustments. Their tone never became hostile. Their body language never betrayed fear or anger. And yet, every word they spoke seemed to rattle the council. Some delegates began to panic quietly, realizing that humans were not just questioning. They were capable of altering the course of the entire negotiation if they chose. During a break in the session, several aliens gathered in the corners to discuss humans in hushed tones. "They are reckless," one said, "but not in the way we expected. They are principled. Dangerous, because they will not bow to authority." Another whispered, "It is terrifying. They are few, yet they command attention. Their calmness, it unnerves me." The humans, meanwhile, took the break to consult among themselves. They did not discuss intimidation tactics, power plays, or politics. They reviewed the points raised, discussed the council's responses, and prepared to continue the negotiation in a way that was consistent with their principles. Even in their small, private conversation, there was a quiet efficiency, a sense of teamwork, and an unwavering focus on fairness. When the session resumed, the council attempted to push back more aggressively. "You are new," the crystalline-winged leader said. "You must accept that some compromises are necessary. We cannot allow endless questioning. The rules exist to protect everyone." The humans replied evenly, "Compromise is acceptable if it is fair. Blind obedience is not. We will discuss, we will negotiate, but fairness cannot be sacrificed for tradition or convenience." For the first time, a sense of panic spread among the council members. They had dealt with difficult species before, but humans were different. They did not flinch at authority, they did not waver under pressure, and they did not respond to intimidation. Their calm, deliberate approach made the council feel exposed and vulnerable. Some delegates tried to whisper privately to one another, seeking advice or reassurance. Others began to reconsider their own positions, wondering if they had underestimated the humans. The chamber, which had been tense before, now felt charged with uncertainty. The humans were few, but their impact was undeniable. By the end of the day, the council had not convinced the humans to accept the proposed plan. The humans had not rejected it either. Instead, they had demanded clarity, fairness, and honesty. Their insistence on principles over protocol left a lasting impression. Some species felt frustrated. Others were secretly impressed. All of them were aware that humans had shifted the tone of the negotiations in ways that could not be ignored. The humans left the chamber once again, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. They had achieved something significant. They had shown that they could stand up for what they believed was right, even in the presence of powers far greater than themselves. Outside the chamber, humans walked through long corridors filled with echoes of alien conversations. They did not boast, and they did not worry. Their focus remained on the next session, on the points that needed further discussion, and on maintaining the principles that had guided them so far. The council, meanwhile, convened behind closed doors. Voices rose in panic and frustration. "They cannot be controlled?" One delegate shouted. "What are we going to do if they reject our rules?" Another whispered fearfully, "We have underestimated them. Entire systems could be affected if they refuse to comply." The humans, back in their quarters, prepared notes, discussed their observations, and anticipated the next session. They were not reckless. They did not seek confrontation for its own sake, but they understood clearly that fairness, honesty, and principle were more important than appeasing fear or tradition. Their calm determination had unsettled the council, but it had also positioned them as a force that could influence the outcome in ways that no one had expected. By the end of Part 2, the humans had established their approach. They would listen, question, and negotiate, but always on the basis of fairness and principle. The Galactic Council, for the first time in centuries, realized that the human way of thinking was not something that could be predicted or controlled. And in that realization lay the true power of humanity, simple, deliberate, uncheckable, and entirely unexpected. The third day of the negotiations began with an unusual tension. The chamber, already vast and intimidating, seemed heavier today. Every species had come prepared, some armed with technological displays, others with elaborate gestures meant to assert power. Yet all eyes kept flicking back to the humans. They were calm, seated together, not flaunting their presence, but somehow drawing attention in a way that unsettled even the most powerful delegates. The Galactic Council opened the session, its crystalline wings glowing faintly under the chamber lights. The council leader's voice, usually steady, carried a hint of strain. "We will continue today with the discussions on resource distribution. Let all representatives speak in turn. Humans, your questions and observations from yesterday have been noted. Let us proceed." The humans listened attentively. They had spent the night reviewing the points raised in the previous session and preparing questions to ensure fairness. The spokesperson spoke first. "We appreciate the explanations so far," they said. "However, there remain issues that must be addressed. Some resources are allocated in ways that disadvantage certain species. These inequities cannot be ignored if the Council truly seeks fairness." Whispers erupted throughout the chamber. Many alien species had assumed that humans would be easily swayed by eloquence or authority. Instead, the humans were methodical. They were not aggressive, Yet every word seemed to cut through the carefully constructed facades of the council. A reptilian delegate, whose scales shimmered gold, leaned toward a colleague and hissed, "They are dissecting us with words." It is unsettling. The humans began to present examples. Certain planets, rich in minerals, were restricted in trade, while others with far less strategic importance were granted excessive privileges. Some species controlled critical trade routes, while others were denied access entirely. The humans highlighted these inconsistencies calmly, their logic precise, their tone firm but respectful. One council member, a gelatinous being capable of shifting shape, tried to interrupt. "These rules are established over centuries. They are necessary for balance." The human spokesperson tilted their head slightly, their voice unwavering. "Balance is meaningless if it benefits some at the expense of others. A rule that disadvantages even one species is not balance. If the council seeks harmony, it must ensure fairness for all, not just for those with influence." The room grew uneasy. For many species, it was unheard of for a newcomer to challenge the council's authority so directly. Aliens whispered nervously, glancing at each other as if seeking guidance. Some tried to hide their fear behind polite nods or gestures, but it was clear humans had shifted the dynamic. They were no longer passive participants. They were forces to be reckoned with. The humans continued their questions, moving methodically from one issue to another. They asked about environmental protections on inhabited planets, trade regulations that favored older civilizations, and enforcement mechanisms that allowed some species to bypass rules entirely. Every question was delivered with a calm clarity that left no room for vague answers. A representative from a floating, energy-based species attempted to assert dominance. "You do not understand the complexity of interstellar governance," it said. "The Council must protect systems, even if some species are disadvantaged temporarily. Your logic is too simple." The human spokesperson replied evenly, "Complexity is no excuse for unfairness. We do not deny that governance is challenging. But temporary disadvantage for some is acceptable only if it is transparent, justified, and agreed upon. Arbitrary rules that favor a few at the cost of many are unacceptable." The tension in the chamber rose. Delegates shifted in their seats, some glaring, some whispering, and others openly panicking. Humans were not aggressive, yet they had created an invisible pressure in the room that everyone felt. Some of the older, more established species whispered among themselves, recognizing that humans were doing something the Council had never faced before. They were exposing weaknesses not with force, but with principle. An insectoid delegate, known for being patient and diplomatic, muttered to a neighboring species, "They are not like any other species. They do not fear, they do not bow, and yet they do not attack. How do you respond to that?" The humans continued, now suggesting alternative solutions to the Council's flawed plans. They proposed redistributing resources in ways that considered population, technological advancement, and planetary stability. They suggested trade adjustments that would prevent monopolies and ensure access to energy, water, and minerals for all civilizations. Each proposal was rational, fair, and designed to create long-term stability rather than temporary control. Some council members began to feel a creeping panic. They had prepared for resistance, but not for this kind of challenge. Humans were not asking for power or dominance. They were not threatening war. They were simply insisting on fairness and logic, and in doing so, they exposed the Council's vulnerabilities. The session reached a critical point when the humans questioned the enforcement methods of the Council. "We have noticed," the spokesperson said, "that some species can bypass regulations through loopholes, influence, or technology. If rules are to be respected, they must apply equally to everyone. Otherwise, the system is not just." Gasps spread through the chamber. A council member from a technologically advanced world, whose species controlled most interstellar communication, whispered furiously to another, "They see through everything. How do we maintain authority if they keep exposing us?" The humans, meanwhile, remained composed. They did not relish the discomfort they caused. They were not trying to embarrass the council. Their goal was simple: fairness, transparency, and the assurance that no species would dominate others unjustly. Delegates tried subtle intimidation tactics. Some leaned forward with threatening postures. Others made loud, aggressive statements meant to silence the humans. Some even attempted minor displays of energy that could be interpreted as warnings. Yet humans did not flinch. Their calmness in the face of intimidation only heightened the council's anxiety. By mid-afternoon, several council members were openly frustrated. "Enough!" one shouted. "We cannot continue with endless questioning. Rules exist to maintain order, not to be debated endlessly by newcomers." The human spokesperson responded calmly, "We do not seek to debate endlessly. We seek clarity, fairness, and understanding. If the council truly wants peace and cooperation, these principles must guide every decision. Without them, the rules are meaningless." The council leader's crystalline wings flickered in visible irritation. "You do not understand the stakes. Some systems are fragile. Some species cannot be allowed to have unchecked freedom. Humans, you must comply with our guidelines." The human spokesperson looked around the room, their tone measured but firm. "We understand perfectly. That is why we ask questions. That is why we propose solutions. Blind obedience is not a path to stability. Fairness and principle are." Whispers filled the chamber again. Several delegates were visibly shaken. They had seen the humans' calm determination and logical reasoning, and for some, it was terrifying. Humans were not simply resisting, they were challenging centuries of tradition without raising their voices or showing aggression. By late afternoon, it became clear that the humans had shifted the negotiations balance. Council members who had once assumed control now realized they were on uncertain ground. The humans had questioned the council's authority without confrontation, and in doing so, they had created a new reality. The council could no longer rely on tradition or fear alone to maintain order. The humans ended the day with a quiet summary of their positions. They did not gloat. They did not threaten. They simply outlined the principles that must guide any fair agreement: transparency, equality, and accountability. These principles were simple, yet they carried a weight that the council had not anticipated. As the humans left the chamber for the evening, delegates whispered nervously. Some acknowledged, privately, that humans had demonstrated courage and clarity that was rare among all species. Others fretted about the unpredictability humans represented. No one could deny that humans had fundamentally changed the dynamic of the negotiations. Outside the chamber, the humans discussed the day's progress. They were not concerned with impressing others or asserting dominance. They focused on ensuring that every point they had made was consistent with fairness and principle. They reviewed observations, discussed potential strategies for future sessions, and maintained a calm, deliberate approach to the challenges ahead. The council, meanwhile, was in disarray. Delegates argued behind closed doors, questioning how to manage the humans. Some suggested using intimidation, others manipulation, and a few quietly admitted that they had no idea how to predict or control this species. The humans had achieved something few had managed before. They had made the council question its own authority. By the end of Part 3, a clear pattern had emerged. Humans were not aggressive. They were not dominant in the traditional sense. But their insistence on principle, their calm defiance, and their logical questioning had created a ripple of uncertainty that spread throughout the council. The negotiation, which had begun as a simple resource discussion, was now a test of courage, fairness, and intellect. Humans had made it clear they would not bend to. The fourth day began with a sense of tension, so thick it could almost be felt in the air. The chamber was filled with delegates from countless worlds, each buzzing with whispered conversations, nervous glances, and occasional mutters of frustration. The humans entered with their usual calm demeanor, moving steadily through the vast hall, heads held high, and eyes carefully observing everything around them. It was a quiet confidence, one that seemed to radiate without effort, and it unsettled every delegate in the room. The Galactic Council's leader, whose crystalline wings shimmered in faint rainbow hues, tried to project authority, but today it was weaker, strained. "We will continue with the negotiations," the leader announced, their voice echoing against the chamber walls. "We expect cooperation from all representatives. Humans, your questions and suggestions from the previous sessions have been noted. We expect progress today, not delays." The humans, seated together in their section, did not respond immediately. They took a moment to review notes, exchange a few quiet words among themselves, and ensure that every concern raised before was addressed clearly. Their silence was deliberate. It was not passive, it was purposeful. Every species in the room felt the weight of it. Finally, the human spokesperson spoke. "We are ready to continue," they said, their voice calm but firm. "However, fairness and clarity must guide every decision. Yesterday, we highlighted inconsistencies and inequities in the proposed system. Today, we expect clear answers." A wave of murmurs ran through the chamber. Some aliens shifted nervously in their seats. Many species had expected the humans to falter or show hesitation by now. They had expected resistance to fade after the first challenge. Instead, humans remained steady, deliberate, and unshaken. That realization caused a quiet panic in some council members. The council attempted to respond with authority. "The system has been designed to maintain balance and prevent chaos," the crystalline-winged leader said. "Humans, you must understand that some rules are necessary to protect the weak and maintain order." The humans did not flinch. Order at the expense of fairness is not protection. Rules cannot favor some species while punishing others. True balance requires transparency and equal responsibility, the spokesperson replied. Their words were simple, but they carried the weight of undeniable logic. The chamber grew tense. Several alien delegates whispered among themselves, clearly unsettled. The humans were not angry, not loud, not threatening, but their presence alone had shifted the dynamics of the room. For centuries, the council had relied on authority, hierarchy, and intimidation to enforce compliance. Humans refused to play by those expectations. Not an attempt to assert dominance came from a massive, armored species from a volcanic world. They leaned forward, their voice booming. "You cannot challenge the council and expect to succeed. Our rules are final. Accept them or face the consequences." The humans remained composed. Consequences are meaningless if the system is unfair. Cooperation requires mutual respect. If rules are to be accepted, they must be just, the spokesperson replied. There was no threat in the tone, no aggression, only a calm insistence on principle. This calm, principled defiance began to unsettle the council in ways that had not been seen before. Behind closed doors, whispers turned to urgent debates. Some delegates suggested using intimidation or secret manipulation. Others began to fear that if humans refused to accept the current system, it could destabilize the entire negotiation. For centuries, the Council had been in control of every major interstellar decision. Humans had shown them that control was an illusion. The humans continued their observations. They highlighted areas where enforcement was uneven, where resources were hoarded by a few species, and where loopholes allowed certain worlds to gain unfair advantages. Their questions were precise, their points logical, and their tone steady. They did not shout or demand. They simply demanded truth, clarity, and fairness. At one point, A telepathic species attempted subtle mental influence to guide the humans toward agreement. The humans noticed immediately. They did not react outwardly, but adjusted their approach with quiet skill, maintaining full composure. The alien delegate, frustrated and unable to exert control, withdrew. It was the first sign that humans were resistant not only to pressure, but also to manipulation. The session continued for hours. The humans proposed alternative solutions, redistribution plans, trade adjustments, environmental safeguards, and transparent enforcement mechanisms. Each proposal was practical, logical, and aimed at long-term stability. It was clear they had not only understood the Council's proposals, but had considered the broader consequences for all species involved. Some delegates tried to dismiss the humans' points as naive or overly idealistic. "You do not understand the complexity of interstellar politics," said one floating, gaseous representative. "The Council's rules exist to maintain order. Your ideas are simplistic." The human spokesperson replied evenly, "Complexity cannot excuse unfairness. Rules must be fair for all. If a system allows some to dominate while others suffer, it is neither complex nor clever. It is unjust." By midday, tension in the chamber had reached a peak. Council members were exchanging worried glances. Some species whispered to each other, realizing they had underestimated humans. The room, filled with centuries of hierarchy and authority, felt fragile. Humans were few in number, yet their presence carried influence far greater than expected. A private meeting among council members erupted into heated argument. "They are too clever," one said. "They expose every flaw without aggression. How do we control a species like this?" Another muttered, "We can try intimidation, threats, or alliances, but they will not bend. They see through us all." Back in the chamber, the humans summarized their concerns. "We do not seek to dominate or disrupt," the spokesperson said. "We seek fairness, transparency, and respect for all species. Rules must serve everyone, not just the powerful. Without these principles, cooperation is meaningless." For the first time, a real panic became visible among some council delegates. Their gestures grew sharper, their voices occasionally louder, and their whispers more frequent. They had faced many challenges in their history, but humans were different. They did not rely on aggression, cunning, or intimidation. They relied on principle, and principle could not be broken. One of the older, more traditional species whispered to a colleague, "I have seen many challenges, but never like this. They do not fear us, yet they unsettle us more than any threat could." Another replied quietly, "It is the calmness, the clarity. They are few, but their presence carries weight." The humans, meanwhile, remained focused. They discussed their observations among themselves quietly, ensuring that each point they made was consistent, logical, and principled. They were aware of the whispers, the glances, and the panic, but they did not allow it to affect them. Their calmness was deliberate, a subtle yet powerful tool that shifted the balance of authority in the room. As the session reached its later stages, the humans made one final point for the day. "We will not accept rules that are unfair, arbitrary, or biased. If the Council cannot provide transparency and equality, we will need to reconsider our participation. We are here to negotiate, not to submit." A stunned silence followed. The chamber, which had been tense all day, seemed to hold its breath. Some delegates leaned forward, their expressions tight. Others whispered urgently. Even the council leaders' crystalline wings flickered with visible tension. The humans had not threatened, yet they had caused fear. Not fear of attack, but fear of principle, the kind that could not be easily countered. The humans stood and left the chamber quietly, walking through the corridors with measured steps. Their calm exit contrasted sharply with the flurry of whispers, gestures, and tense discussions left behind. Every delegate who had watched them knew that the balance had shifted. The humans had made their stance unmistakable. Fairness and principle would guide them, and nothing else. Behind the scenes, council members convened emergency meetings. They cannot be controlled, one admitted, voice low but urgent. They do not respond to threats, tradition, or pressure. What do we do if they walk away entirely? Another whispered, we must find compromise, but they will not settle for false compromise. They are principled, unpredictable, dangerous, in a way that power cannot contain. The humans, in their quarters, prepared for the next session. They reviewed the points raised, noted the council's reactions, and discussed strategies that remained consistent with their principles. Their approach was simple, deliberate, and unshakable. They did not seek conflict, but they also did not yield. By the end of Part 4, a clear pattern had emerged. The humans had shown that calm determination, principle, and clarity could unsettle even the most powerful and long-established authorities in the galaxy. The Council had begun to panic, realizing that traditional methods of control were ineffective. Humans were few, but their influence was undeniable. They had set the stage for a confrontation, unlike any the Council had ever faced, not with weapons, but with integrity and unwavering resolve. And in that realization, a quiet tension filled the corridors of the council chambers. The humans had not made a single threat, yet the council knew one thing for certain. If the humans chose to walk away from these negotiations, the galaxy. The fifth day of the negotiations began with a palpable sense of anticipation and tension. The Galactic Council's chambers were filled with delegates from countless worlds, each seated and ready to continue discussions. Yet today, there was something different in the air. The humans were not just participants. They were a force that could no longer be ignored or underestimated. Whispers and murmurs moved like a current through the assembly. As delegates exchanged anxious glances and discussed in hushed tones what they had witnessed over the past days, the humans entered the chamber with their usual calm and steady pace. They did not rush, and they did not hesitate. Their eyes scanned the assembly, taking note of every gesture, every flicker of expression, and every subtle sign of tension among the council members and delegates. There was no arrogance in their demeanor, no need to assert dominance. Their mere presence had become a statement. They were here to be heard, and they would not be dismissed. The council leader, crystalline wings flickering in faint light, attempted to project authority. We will proceed with today's session. We expect cooperation from all representatives, especially humans. Progress must be made. Endless delays will not be tolerated. The humans did not respond immediately. They paused as if considering the chamber itself before the spokesperson finally spoke. We have considered the council's proposals in detail. We have asked questions, highlighted inconsistencies, and suggested adjustments for fairness. Today, we are prepared to make our position clear. The room grew quieter. Every species seemed to hold its breath. Humans were few in number, yet they commanded attention far beyond their physical presence. Every delegate understood that what the humans were about to do could change the course of these negotiations, and perhaps the balance of power in the galaxy itself. The human spokesperson continued, "We are willing to participate in this council, to engage in discussion and negotiation, but we cannot accept rules that are fundamentally unfair. If the council cannot provide transparency, equality, and fairness, we cannot continue to endorse a system that disadvantages some species while benefiting others." A wave of murmurs spread through the chamber. Delegates whispered urgently to one another, some with disbelief, some with concern. A large, armored species from a volcanic world hissed under its breath. They would walk away. And we cannot allow that. The humans' words were deliberate, calm, and unshakable. They did not threaten, they did not shout, and they did not attempt to intimidate. Yet the chamber seemed to tense, as if their statements were a physical force. The council members, used to control and compliance, were confronted with something they could not manipulate: principle, clarity, and quiet resolve. The council leader spoke again, attempting to regain control. Humans, you must understand that the rules are in place for a reason. Compliance is necessary to maintain balance. If you walk away, there will be consequences. The humans listened carefully, then responded evenly. We understand the consequences. We also understand that compliance without fairness is not true cooperation. We cannot accept rules that are biased or arbitrary. If the council insists on maintaining them, we will need to reconsider our participation entirely. A hush fell over the chamber. The words were not a threat in the traditional sense, but their impact was undeniable. For centuries, the council had relied on authority, intimidation, and the weight of tradition to enforce compliance. Now, humans had made it clear that their participation could not be bought, coerced, or assumed. They had placed principle above fear, and that had created panic. Some delegates attempted to respond with forceful argument. You are few, humans. You cannot change the system alone. You must comply, shouted a multi-limbed creature whose species had controlled several critical trade routes for centuries. The human spokesperson remained calm. We are aware of the numbers, but fairness is not determined by numbers or power. It is determined by principle. If the system is unjust, we cannot participate merely to maintain appearances or satisfy tradition. Whispers turned to frantic discussions among the other delegates. The humans' calm defiance had exposed a vulnerability no one had anticipated. The council, and the species that relied on it for power, realized that the humans could walk away, and if they did, it would cause a ripple effect that no one could control. The humans rose together. There was no drama, no show of force, no flourish of gesture. They simply stood, each movement measured, deliberate, and calm. Their spokesperson spoke one final time, with steady clarity. If fairness cannot be ensured, we must leave this chamber. We are here to negotiate, not to comply blindly. The room seemed to freeze. Some delegates gasped. Others whispered frantically. For centuries, the council had faced rebellion, defiance, and manipulation, but nothing like this. The humans were walking a path that was entirely their own, guided not by fear, tradition, or ambition, but by principle and integrity. A murmur of panic spread through the council. Some delegates attempted to block the humans physically, stepping in their path, waving appendages, or creating energy barriers. But the humans did not hesitate or flinch. They navigated the chamber with quiet confidence, their movements calm and deliberate. Their decision to walk away was not impulsive, it was measured, planned, and principled. The council leader's crystalline wings trembled faintly. Stop them, they commanded, their voice tight with panic. You cannot leave. You cannot undermine the council. The humans continued to move forward, ignoring the threats. Their calmness was unnerving. They did not argue. They did not negotiate further. They simply proceeded according to their principles. Every step they took was a message. Humans would not submit, and nothing the council could do would force them to bend. The panic among the council members grew. Some species attempted last-minute persuasion, promising concessions or temporary agreements. The humans listened politely, but shook their heads. No compromise would satisfy them if the underlying system remained unjust. Their refusal was absolute yet composed, demonstrating a strength of character that none had expected. Observers from less powerful species watched in awe. Humans were not aggressive, but they were reshaping the room with their presence alone. Many species had assumed that authority, tradition, or threat would be enough to command obedience. Humans proved that principle and quiet resolve were far more powerful. As the humans exited the chamber, the whispers and panic escalated. Delegates who had once relied on tradition for control were now scrambling, discussing contingency plans and considering ways to prevent further disruption. The council realized that the humans' departure was not just symbolic, it had practical consequences for trade, resource management, and interstellar alliances. Outside the chamber, the humans did not celebrate, and they did not gloat. They walked with quiet dignity, their conversations focused on fairness, principle, and clarity. Every action reinforced the message. They were not here to dominate, but they would not compromise their values for convenience, fear, or tradition. The council, meanwhile, convened emergency meetings behind closed doors. Voices rose in panic and frustration. "They cannot be controlled," one delegate exclaimed. "They have no fear, no arrogance, no weakness to exploit. How do we respond if they refuse to participate further?" Another whispered urgently, "We must find compromise, but they will not accept empty promises. They are principled, methodical, and unyielding. If they leave, the balance we rely on could collapse." The humans, back in their quarters, prepared quietly for the next steps. They reviewed every point raised, discussed potential responses, and ensured that their approach remained consistent with fairness and integrity. They were aware of the council's panic, but they did not allow it to distract or influence them. Their actions were guided by principle, not reaction. By the end of the day, the humans had walked away from the chamber, leaving the council in visible chaos. Delegates whispered urgently, panicked about what the departure meant for negotiations, trade, and interstellar relations. For the first time, the council realized that control was not absolute. Humans had shown that calm, principled defiance could unsettle even the most powerful institutions in the galaxy. Across the galaxy, observers noted the events of the day. Stories spread quickly. Humans had stood firm, questioned authority, and walked away rather than compromise on fairness. They had demonstrated a strength that was rare and remarkable, not through violence, manipulation, or numbers, but through principle, clarity, and courage. The humans returned to their quarters quietly, focused on preparation rather than celebration. They knew that the coming days would bring challenges, but they also knew they had achieved something significant. They had shown the council and the galaxy that fairness and principle mattered more than tradition, fear, or intimidation. By the end of Part 5, the humans had achieved a remarkable feat. They had walked away, not with aggression or confrontation, but with quiet dignity and unwavering resolve. The council had panicked, realizing that their traditional methods of control were ineffective. The humans' actions had shifted the balance of power in the chamber, showing that principle, integrity, and calm defiance could be more powerful than any weapon or alliance. And with that, the stage was set for the final part. The humans' quiet strength had left the council's gray. The day after the humans walked away from the council chambers, the atmosphere throughout the entire Galactic Council was tense, almost electric. Delegates gathered early, whispering urgently to one another, their gestures sharp and quick. The humans' decision to leave had created a shockwave that rippled far beyond the chamber. Species that had always relied on tradition, hierarchy, and authority were suddenly unsure. The humans had not yelled, had not threatened, and had not displayed any aggressive power. But their calm defiance had done more to unsettle the council than decades of intimidation could have achieved. Inside the chambers, the council convened emergency meetings. The crystalline winged leader floated to the center, their glow dimmed slightly in frustration. "We have underestimated them," they admitted to the assembled delegates. "They do not respond to fear. They do not respond to pressure. And they will not bend to authority. If they choose to leave, the consequences will affect every system in this galaxy." Some of the delegates whispered nervously. The insectoid species, known for patience and diplomacy, muttered, "It is terrifying." They walk away without fear, without hesitation, yet with complete purpose. How do we negotiate with a species like this? Others, more aggressive and territorial, suggested using threats or leverage. "We can force them to comply," one said, "or isolate their home systems until they are forced to return." But even these voices were uncertain, because every suggestion met the same internal doubt. Humans had not acted out of fear, need, or desire for gain. They had acted based on principle. And principles, unlike power or influence, could not be controlled. Back on the human ship, they quietly reviewed the events of the past days. There was no celebration, no gloating, only calm discussion and reflection. "We made our point clearly," said the spokesperson. "We stood for fairness and principle. We did not need to prove our power to anyone, but our presence has already caused change." Another human nodded. Yes, they are scrambling. They realize that rules cannot simply be enforced by authority anymore. They cannot pretend that everything is balanced. Our departure has made them confront their own inconsistencies. Across the galaxy, word of the humans' actions spread quickly. Communications networks buzzed with reports. Humans had stood up to the council, questioned the rules, and walked away rather than accept injustice. Observers from neutral planets, minor species, and even powerful empires watched the events closely. Humans had set a precedent. A species could influence even the most rigid systems without wielding weapons or threats. Simply by standing firm in their values, the council convened again. This time in a smaller emergency session. Delegates argued heatedly, trying to decide the next step. Some advocated compromise, offering temporary concessions to lure the humans back. Others proposed more extreme measures, sanctions, isolation, or even subtle manipulation. But every plan was met with doubt. Humans had demonstrated that they could not be intimidated, coerced, or manipulated in the ways the council was accustomed to. The council leader, visibly exhausted and tense, finally addressed the assembly. "We face a species unlike any we have encountered. They do not respond to tradition, authority, or fear. They act according to principle and reason. If they choose to leave permanently, we will need to reconsider everything we have done to maintain order across the galaxy." Meanwhile, the humans did not sit idle. They prepared documents, proposals, and notes highlighting the areas that required fairness and transparency. They were not seeking conflict. They were not trying to dominate. But they were methodical, deliberate, and unwavering. Every action reinforced the message. They would act only on principle. And they would not compromise fairness for convenience or fear in smaller corners of the galaxy. Leaders of other civilizations began to take notice. Many species had long suffered under the Council's opaque systems. Now, seeing humans challenge authority without aggression, some felt hope, while others felt fear. The humans' actions demonstrated that a single species, by remaining steadfast and principled, could change the behavior of the most powerful institutions. Days passed. The Council attempted multiple strategies to bring the humans back to the negotiation table. Delegates sent envoys, messages, and even subtle offers of compromise. Each effort was met with polite but firm refusal. The humans explained clearly they would not negotiate in a system that lacked transparency, fairness, and equality. Their goal was not to humiliate the Council, but to ensure that every species was treated justly. The Council's panic grew. The whispers became arguments. Some delegates suggested that humans were dangerous, simply because they could not be controlled. Others admitted quietly that humans were a force of logic and principle, and that no display of authority could bend them. It was a type of power the Council had never faced before, and the realization was unsettling. Inside the humans' ship, discussions were calm and organized. "We need to be prepared," said one human. "The council will try again. They may attempt subtle pressure or manipulation, but we must remain steady. Our position is clear, and we will not compromise." Another added, "We have already changed the council. Even our absence forces them to confront their own systems. They cannot pretend everything is fine anymore. That is influence in itself." Indeed, the humans' absence had immediate effects. Trade negotiations stalled. Resource allocations were delayed. Even minor systems that depended on council rulings began to feel the ripple effects. It became clear that humans were not just participants, they were a catalyst for systemic reflection and change. The council convened again, this time with more urgency and caution. Delegates spoke in measured tones, and some admitted that the humans' departure had created the most serious disruption the council had faced in centuries. "They walk away, and yet we cannot dismiss them," one admitted quietly. "They have shown us that our authority relies not on justice, but on compliance. If compliance is no longer guaranteed, we are exposed." In their quarters, the humans reviewed these developments. They did not act with glee or self-congratulation. Instead, they recognized that their actions had consequences far beyond the chamber. "Our responsibility now," said the spokesperson, "is to remain principled and ready. We have changed the council's perception of our species. Now we must ensure that our actions continue to uphold fairness, not only for us, but for all who are affected." Observers across the galaxy continued to watch. Many species had long desired reform in council operations. The humans' quiet defiance and principled stand inspired others to consider what fairness truly meant. Even species that had traditionally relied on manipulation or hierarchy began to question whether the council's authority was just or arbitrary. As time passed, the council began to recognize the humans' impact. Internal reports described the humans as unpredictable, principled, and calm in ways that destabilize authority without aggression. Strategists admitted that previous tactics of intimidation, persuasion, and coercion were ineffective. Humans had proven that influence could come from principle, logic, and calm resolve rather than weapons, numbers, or hierarchy. The humans, meanwhile, maintained their focus. They were not seeking victory over the council. Their goal was fairness, transparency, and principle. Every action they took was deliberate, considered, and measured. They reviewed proposals, identified inequities, and prepared for future dialogue, but only on terms that ensured justice for all parties. Months passed, and the council began to adapt, not by forcing humans to comply, but by reconsidering their systems and practices. The humans' walk away had forced reflection, debate, and reform. Policies were examined more closely. Rules that favored some species were challenged. Transparency became a more central priority. Humans' actions had triggered a shift that no amount of authority or intimidation could reverse. Finally, the council reached out once more, not with threats, not with demands, but with an offer of genuine negotiation. They acknowledged past inequities, promised to review unfair policies, and invited humans to return on the basis of fairness and transparency. Humans considered the offer carefully, reviewing every detail, every proposed adjustment, and every assurance. They were not hasty. They would not compromise principle for convenience. In the end, the humans returned to the council chambers not as aggressors, not as conquerors, but as representatives of fairness, principle, and reason. Their calm, deliberate actions had reshaped the council's approach. They had walked away, created disruption through integrity, and forced reflection in a way that no force or threat could have achieved. By the conclusion of these events, the humans had left a lasting impact on the galaxy. They had shown that courage does not always roar, that power is not always weapons or numbers, and that principle, clarity, and integrity can influence even the most powerful institutions. Delegates across the galaxy began to speak of humans with respect and sung with quiet awe. The council itself changed its approach. Decision-making processes became more transparent. Resource allocations were reviewed with fairness in mind, and debates included voices that had previously been ignored. The humans' quiet strength had created reform and reflection. Their actions demonstrated that a species guided by principle could reshape systems, challenge authority, and bring about meaningful change with